What's up YouTube? It's the one and only Legend of Winning, aka Low, and I am back again with another video. Now, not too long ago I made my 4 most overrated players in NBA history, one of my more controversial videos that I have on my channel, so make sure you go check that out. Of course, in response to that video, I obviously have to make my 4 most underrated players in NBA history, which is the video that you're watching right now. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like and comment on the video as well. It really helps me out. Also, if you want to be updated on all the NBA content that I upload to this channel, make sure you subscribe. Right now is by far the best time to subscribe because the NBA season is right around the corner. We're roughly about a month and a half away from the NBA season from kicking off, and there's a lot of things I still have to talk about. Certain things like my MVP predictions, my seedings, who I think will make it all the way to the playoffs and eventually win the finals, everything. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can be updated on all the NBA content that I will be uploading very, very soon. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. Here are the 4 most underrated players in NBA history. First, we have Dennis Johnson. DJ found himself entering the league in the '76 draft and found himself on the Seattle Supersonics, a franchise that just entered the league roughly 10 years prior to him entering the league. However, Dennis Johnson is more known for his time with the Boston Celtics, where he won 2 NBA championships along with being an all-star as well. Now, throughout Dennis Johnson's career, he found himself in multiple playoff appearances, actually making the playoffs every year in his career outside of his rookie year. Also, before Boston, he played for Seattle and Phoenix, and in that time period, he was a 4-time All-Star. Dennis Johnson in his career after the 89-1990 season as a 5-time All-Star, selected for an All-NBA team 2 times, selected for an All-Defensive team 9 times, a 3-time champion, and also a Finals MVP to go with it. And in 2010, Dennis Johnson was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Now, why is Dennis Johnson on this list? I think a lot of people may look at his numbers and his accolades and his accomplishments and come to the conclusion the fact that he's in the Hall of Fame is more than enough recognition for a player at that stature. When in reality, I think we need to pay a tad bit more respect to Dennis Johnson and the well-rounded player that he was. A lot of people view Dennis Johnson as that point guard that played with the Boston Celtics in the mid-80s, and unfortunately he was more than that. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people fail to realize how productive of a player he was before he found himself on the Boston Celtics. And because of this, unfortunately, Dennis Johnson ends up suffering from sidekick syndrome. See, sidekick syndrome is something that plagues a lot of underrated players simply because they played with a great player or a few great players on their team and they found some success with these great players. A lot of people tend to degrade and belittle their productivity when it came to producing a ring or a championship to the organization. And unfortunately, I feel like Dennis Johnson falls under that umbrella even though he shouldn't. So what a lot of people fail to realize is that Dennis Johnson was the face of the Seattle Supersonics before he ended up on the Boston Celtics, and actually granted them a championship ring within his 3rd year in the NBA. And not only led that team to a championship, but also won Finals MVP that year as well. Also with Seattle and then later on Phoenix, he was a 4-time All-Star as well. So the fact that he was a 2nd-round pick, which is fairly underrating him, the fact that he actually led the Seattle Supersonics to their first championship after them being only introduced into the league 10 years later, and moving down the line, ended up winning 2 more championships with the Boston Celtics, you would believe that Dennis Johnson was a first ballot Hall of Famer, and unfortunately that's just not the case. And the fact that it took nearly 20 years and him passing away for them to finally come to the conclusion that he should be in the Hall of Fame, again, is a tragedy to say the least. Next, we have Chris Webber. A personal favorite of mine, C-Web found himself entering the NBA in the 1993 draft. There, he was drafted by the Orlando Magic, but later traded to the Golden State Warriors. With his rookie year with the Golden State Warriors, C-Web posted nearly 18 points, 9 rebounds, and almost 4 assists. With numbers like those, it was fairly easy to understand why he won Rookie of the Year. After the Golden State Warriors, he found himself on the Washington Bullets, where he received his first All-Star selection. However, I think a lot of people recognize Chris Webber with his time in Sacramento. Right after his time came to a close in Washington, Chris Webber found himself in Sacramento, a team that desperately needed a face of the franchise to continue to push them back into the playoffs so they can consistently find success within the NBA. Luckily for them, Chris Webber was just that guy, and throughout his time in Sacramento, Chris Webber posted some of the craziest numbers that the league has ever seen. Unfortunately, the numbers that he posted just wasn't enough, and after the 03-04 season, Chris Webber was looking for a new team and found himself in Philly, and then after that Detroit, and then shortly after he finally retired in the 2008 season. Chris Webber ended his career being a 5-time All-Star, a 5-time All-NBA, and of course the Rookie of the Year in the 1993-1994 season. But that's it. Chris Webber doesn't have any Hall of Fame acclamation at all, even though he has posted up really solid numbers throughout his entire career. Ended his career averaging nearly 21 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists. So why is C-Webb underrated? A lot of people come with different arguments to why C-Webb doesn't receive the right notoriety, and a lot of them are kind of questionable, but I thoroughly understand. But in my opinion, the biggest reason why Chris Webber is so underrated is simply because he played at a point in time where he just wasn't going to get the notoriety that he rightfully deserved. I mean, look at the point in time where C-Webb played. He played at a point in time where he just was never going to be the best power forward, because he played in the 90s where you had both Karl Malone and Charles Barkley, and then in the early 2000s you had Tim Duncan, Dirk Nowitzki, and Kevin Garnett. The fact that he played in the time period where arguably 5 of the greatest power forwards in the game were playing all at the exact same time is pretty crazy. Not only that, even the numbers that he posted within his time in the NBA are some of the craziest numbers the league has ever seen. Chris Webber twice in his NBA career had seasons where he posted at least 20 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, a steal and a half, and a block and a half. Numbers like that have only been posted 10 times in NBA history, which is something that is extremely rare to do. However, the other 10 times that it happened, almost all of them happened within the time that Chris Webber was playing. Not only was Chris Webber able to do this twice, but Kevin Garnett did this 3 times, Charles Barkley did it, Karl Malone and David Robinson did it as well. So even though Chris Webber was putting up some extremely rare numbers, a lot of it came off as really common, simply because there were other players in the NBA that were doing the exact same thing. So again, all of this is just completely unfortunate. The fact that Chris Webber has the numbers and the accolades and the accomplishments that should put him in the Hall of Fame, unfortunately he still isn't there, even though he retired 8 years ago. Next we have Sidney Moncrief. Now Sidney Moncrief, aka Sid the Squid, I don't know why I said that. I just like that nickname. It's one of his nicknames. I actually like it pretty much. Pretty solid nickname, Sidney Moncrief. I see you out here. But anyway, Sidney Moncrief found himself with the Milwaukee Bucks after entering the NBA draft in the 1979 season and found a home in Milwaukee, spending 10 out of the 11 seasons with the Bucks. Throughout his time in the league, Sidney Moncrief ended his career as a 5-time All-Star, also was selected for an All-NBA team 5-time, also selected for an All-Defensive team 5-time, and is a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. Also, Sidney Moncrief made sure that the Milwaukee Bucks stayed a relevant team and made sure that they made the playoffs every single year he stayed in the franchise. For 10 years straight, the Milwaukee Bucks consistently made the playoff appearances, and a lot of that should be a credit to Sidney Moncrief. After the 1991 season, Sidney Moncrief decided to call it quits and ended up retiring, but unfortunately, even up until this day, Sidney Moncrief is not inducted into the Hall of Fame. So why is Sidney Moncrief so underrated? Well, for one, I think a lot of people may underrate Sidney Moncrief simply because of the numbers that he posted. A lot of people may come to the conclusion that Sidney Moncrief really isn't that great of a player simply because he doesn't have crazy numbers. I mean, he has multiple seasons where he's not even averaging 20 points, and he only averaged roughly around 20 points for a 5 to 6 year window. So again, that's not all that impressive. I know a lot of people get caught up in looking at points instead of the whole big picture, because in reality, Sidney Moncrief was more than just a regular combo guard. Sidney Moncrief was a defensive player that was able to give you 20 to 23 points, along with 5 to 6 rebounds and 4 or 5 assists, which is something that's extremely productive. Going back to his accolades and his accomplishments, like I stated earlier, Sidney Moncrief is a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, something that really doesn't happen that often, especially when it comes to perimeter players. Actually, Sidney Moncrief for a very long time was the only 2-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner that was a perimeter player, up until recently when Kawhi Leonard was able to accomplish this, and he did it back-to-back years, just like Sidney Moncrief did it as well. But to go further into the Defensive Player of the Year award winners, A lot of times the Defensive Player of the Year award goes to big men. A lot of power forwards and center win it, and not too many perimeter players actually receive this accomplishment. Only players like Kawhi Leonard, Ron Artest, Gary Payton, Michael Jordan, Michael Cooper, and Alvin Robertson have received this award. So the fact that Sidney Moncrief was able to receive this accomplishment not once but twice and did it back-to-back seasons is still pretty impressive. But I think by far the biggest reason why a lot of people don't recognize Sidney Moncrief and what he was able to do for the Milwaukee Bucks is simply due to the fact that he played in the wrong decade. Similar to Chris Webber, Sidney Moncrief just wasn't going to receive the accolades and the accomplishments that he probably should have received simply because he played in the 80s. And on top of that, he played in the East, which is extremely hard. The fact that he made the playoffs every single season probably doesn't do him enough justice simply because he didn't make it that far into the playoffs consistently throughout his career. When you actually take the time out and you look at who he kept losing to in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference in the 80s, you're talking about the Boston Celtics that's led by Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish. You're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers led by Dr. J and Moses Malone. And you're talking about the Detroit Pistons that's led by Isaiah Thomas. At that point in time, the 80s was completely decked out with so much talent, Hall of Fame talent, some of the greatest teams the NBA has ever seen. The fact that he was able to make the playoffs and actually push his team to the conference finals 2 times in and of itself should give him more than enough credit for what he was able to accomplish on that team. And finally, people, we have Mark McGwire. Mark McGwire entered the league in the 1981 draft and found himself on the Dallas Mavericks. At this point in time, the Dallas Mavericks was a new franchise, literally just being established in the NBA a year prior to Mark McGwire being drafted. In his rookie year, Mark McGwire posted up 19 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, shooting 46, nearly 47% from the field. Not too far down the road, 2 years later, Mark McGwire found himself receiving all-star acclamations, posting up 29 points, nearly 30 points actually, 5 to 6 rebounds, 4 to 5 assists, shooting 52% from the field. Shortly after that season, Mark McGwire continued to push his success in the playoffs and actually dragged the Dallas Mavericks all the way to the Western Conference Finals, where he faced off against the Showtime Lakers. Now, Mark McGwire with the Dallas Mavericks was able to push the Showtime Lakers to a 7-game series in the Western Conference Finals, but unfortunately came short. Shortly after his failures in the Western Conference Finals with the Dallas Mavericks, Mark McGwire found himself with the Detroit Pistons, where he would basically end his career winning 2 championships with the Pistons led by Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars. Mark McGwire ended his career in the 1993-1994 season as a 3-time All-Star, 2-time champion, and that's it. That's all the accolades that Mark McGwire was able to accomplish. So why is Mark McGwire so underrated? First and foremost, he played in an era where his talents and his numbers and his accomplishments was drowned out by a whole bunch of other great players. First and foremost, when you look at his scoring abilities, Mark McGwire has multiple seasons where he was averaging 24, 25, and of course the one season that I referred to earlier where he was nearly averaging 30 points per game. Unfortunately for Mark McGwire, there were so many other players that were posting up crazy numbers just like he was, and what makes it even worse, they were playing small forward just like him. You had everybody from Alex English, Adrian Dantley, Dominique Wilkins, Julius Erving, and of course, Larry Bird. So because of the fact that he played at a point in time where there were other great small forwards, and on top of that there were other great scorers, a lot of things that Mark McGwire was able to accomplish, statistically speaking, just went unnoticed. And on top of that, he wasn't able to receive any All-NBA selections, even though he was putting up All-NBA numbers. And on top of that, he played in the Western Conference at a point in time where you had the Showtime Lakers. Like I said earlier, even though he was on a team that just established itself right before he entered the league, he was still able to drag that team into the playoffs consistently and actually push them all the way to the Western Conference Finals. But here's where a lot of things get more frustrating. Mark McGwire was able to lead his team, a new franchise, and a lot of people make this consistent argument that as long as you lead a team and as long as you are a face of a franchise, you should receive the recognition that you rightfully deserve. Well, Mark McGwire did that, and he posted up crazy numbers at the exact same time. But then on the other hand, you have people who make this argument that the only thing that matters in the NBA is championships. And if you don't win championships, and if you don't win rings, and if you don't have these accomplishments, then all of that stuff doesn't even matter. but Mark McGwire did that as well. After finding himself in the Detroit Pistons, Mark McGwire cut his minutes, his touches, his numbers, everything. He sacrificed a lot to fit in with the Detroit Pistons so he can make sure that he wins as much as he possibly can, even to the point where he actually started to come off the bench and he was still a very productive player. Obviously, he was going to be snubbed for a lot of All-NBA selections, and obviously he was going to miss some All-Star games as well, simply because, again, the time period that he played in. But I would have thought at least the amount of numbers he put up, and again, the championship that he won, he would have at least made the Hall of Fame, or at least Dallas would have retired his number, but that hasn't happened neither. Hopefully, a lot of people can start recognizing what Mark McGwire has done for the league and done for the Dallas Mavericks, and hopefully we can change the tone on how great of a player he is. So there you have it, people. Those are the 4 most underrated players in NBA history. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. Also, leave a comment on some of the more underrated players you believe that were in NBA history. Also, make sure you like the video if you enjoyed the video. Like I stated earlier, make sure you subscribe because I will be uploading more videos when it comes to NBA, because the NBA season is right around the corner. And hopefully I will see y'all next time. Peace.